The dust jacket at the back of this book reads, "A single book can change your life." You know what? It could have said, "This book can change your life," because it is so good that it certainly can. Why? Let's dive in. So, what do we have here? This is a book which is not just amazing to read, this is also a book which is very pretty to look at. And the reason is because the cover is so nice. The dust jacket is all white and it's got that circular swoosh which says the courage to be disliked. The swoosh is in black and red. And if I were to take the dust jacket off, here we go, then I have got a book in black which on the side says again the courage to be disliked as well as the author's name. As I always mention, which type of book should one purchase? Now, this is the one wherein I would highly recommend that we purchase a hardcover, because this is not a book that I'll read only once. This is a book that I most certainly will read multiple times, and that's what I would believe that any of the reader would do. So, a book in hardcover would be highly recommended. Now, as I start to review this book, I think I would draw 3 points which will help us understanding the context of the book. Now, the very first of them is, who are the authors and why has this book been written? Okay, so the book is written by Ichiro Kishimi and Fumitake Koga. All right, and Ichiro Kishimi, who is the author of the book, one of the authors of the book, he was born in 1950s, and right from his high school, he wanted to be a philosopher. So he of course read a lot of book on philosophy, on psychology, and stuff like that. And he then started writing on the psychologist by name Alfred Adler. He wrote a book in Japanese, and the name of the book in Japanese was Adora Shinrigaku Newmon, which basically means Introduction to Adlerian Psychology, right? So he wrote that book, and then comes 1999 when the other author, which is Fumitake Koga, he just happened to pick that book. So Mr. Koga happened to pick this book, which is the Introduction of Adlerian Psychology, and he read it. And when he read it, he had that sort of feeling to say, "Oh my God, this is so awesome! This can sort of change my life." So what he does next, he starts to pick every other book that he could find on Alfred Adler, on Adlerian psychology, and he read a lot of them. Now, having read all those books, what he really felt was that, yeah, it was good, but he could actually relate to the first book more so than any of those, any of the others, right? That first book was the introduction to Adlerian psychology by Ichiro Kishimi, and therefore he started to reach out to Mr. Kishimi. Fast forward to 2010, that's when Mr. Kishimi and Mr. Koga could meet. And when they met each other and when they entered a chat, what Mr. Kishimi did explain was to say that, he was looking at Adler through the lenses of Greek philosophy, in specific through Socrates and Plato. And then he said that I wanted to be the Plato to Adler, right? And what he means by saying that is that Socrates, he didn't write book by himself. It was Plato who wrote about Socrates. So he says, Mr. Kishimi, that he wanted to be that Plato, that person who could write about what Adler thought, both from a terms of psychology, but even from the part wherein it overlaps, with the Greek philosophy. At this point in time, Mr. Koga said to Mr. Kishimi, "Why can't I be your Plato?" Okay, so that's the first context I want to draw. This is how this book came into its being. Context number two: philosophy versus psychology. So, what is philosophy? Now, there are a number of definitions out there, but the one that I relate to most is philosophy is the love for wisdom. So anything which makes you feel that, yeah, this could improve your overall quality of life, this could improve how you think about thoughts, how you think about everything else, that's philosophy. And when you're doing that, you are philosophizing. In fact, here's the book, which is very good primer on what philosophy is. If you will be able to see that, it is a philosophy book, but right now is not the time to this, so I'll just keep it aside. So that is philosophy. Okay, and then the context number three, what is psychology? Psychology is basically anything and everything. It is the scientific study of mind and the behaviors, right? So that is everything psychology. And by the very definition of it, the overlap, philosophy, psychology overlap. But I believe everything that's within psychology is pretty much is also in philosophy. So there is, to that effect, psychology a subset of philosophy. Within that psychology, among a number of things, there is a piece which is known as psychoanalysis, and the psychoanalysis is which comprises of the scientific techniques as well as the theories that talk about the subconscious mind as well as how that impacts our behavior, right? So that is psychoanalysis. Now there is a reason why I'm going down that line, because within this psychoanalysis world there were a number of great figures, but there are three which are talked about in this book. Number one was Sigmund Freud. I think a lot of us will know about Sigmund Freud. He had this seminal work on interpretation of dreams, ego, superego, repression, trauma, sexuality, Oedipus complex. I think these are all the things that were sort of suggested, propounded by Sigmund Freud. Then we had Carl Jung. Now, Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud, they worked together a lot, and Carl Jung later on had a few other ways of explaining a few things. Then there was third, a gentleman by name Alfred Adler. And Alfred Adler had a different sort of psychology concept that he brought about. Now that's known as Adlerian psychology, and that Adlerian psychology is what this book talks about. Yeah. So now let's jump into understanding what the book has. But before we do, I've got another additional bonus thing to suggest. The fourth one in the psychoanalysis was by Viktor Frank. Viktor Frank came up with this theory he called as logotherapy. Again, not the right time to mention or go into detail on this. I will possibly cover that later. But the context really was to tell you why and how this book got written, sort of a drive the distinction between philosophy versus psychology, and within psychology, let you know about psychoanalysis, and within psychoanalysis, how it was Sigmund Freud, how it was Carl Jung, and how it was Alfred Adler, who were the known figures. And this book, in specific, talks about what Alfred Adler said. So this book is written in a question and answer format, and the way those question and answers happen is that there is a philosopher and there is a youth who have this chat to try and understand more about life, try and understand more about some of the problems that this youth is facing, and this philosopher tries and answer those from the perspective of what Alfred Adler had said, but equally giving a mashup between Alfred Adler and Socrates, Plato, a lot of Greek philosophy. So that's how this entire book is. The book can be divided into five different parts. And the way that it is those conversations happen over a period of 5 nights. So therefore, I will now cover each of those nights, each of those chapters, and that'll give you a better idea of what the book contains. So on night one, the conversation that happens between the youth and the philosopher, they revolve around the concept of denying trauma. And there are a number of amazing points that get discussed during this night. There are four, though, which I thought are worth mentioning, and here we go. Number one, it says past doesn't matter. Now, when the philosopher says past doesn't matter, he talks about something called teleology, and he draws a distinction between teleology versus etiology. Teleology is something that Alfred Adler came up with, basically saying the past doesn't matter. It doesn't matter the sort of childhood that you had, what was sort of offered to you. If you really want to make a change, if you really want to turn out different, you can, which is very different to what Sigmund Freud had said, who had said from an etiology perspective, because a few things have happened, because some sort of traumas have happened, a person really unfolds in a certain way. So that was one point that came out of this. The second was people fabricate anger. And then it hit me hard when I read that, because even I get angry at times. But it says that people fabricate anger. It is not that you get angry and then you start shouting. It is really that you have thought that you want to shout and then you fabricate anger, right? And there's a distinction. There's a discussion around that. Uh, Point number three, people choose to be unhappy. It's not that they are unhappy. A lot of time they choose to be unhappy. Now, in here again, the way Adler defines it is to say that you do the sort of analysis, you do the maths in your mind, and you say that, you know what, becoming unhappy will really be good for me. And therefore, you become unhappy. So it says that on a lot of occasions, you would say, oh, you know what, a lot of bad things happened with me. X did this, Y did this, and life's been not so good. And you know what, I'm so sad. And you are actually unhappy while you say that, but you're saying it because you know other person would listen to this, and that in a certain context will be good for you. So that's the third point that came out of this chapter. And the fourth one was that people choose not to change, and they don't change as it takes courage. So those are the 4 points, 4 good points that came out of the discussion that happened on night one. Now go to the night two. Okay, on to the night two. So after the night one, the youth goes back home and he's ruminating over all those points. He comes back, a discussion ensues on the next night, which is known as night two. So on the night two, the discussion revolves around the fact that all problems are interpersonal problems. Again, this is something that was propounded by Adlerian psychology, and there are a number of good points that come here, but I have again taken four that I would want to talk about. Number one is around inferiority, superiority, inferiority complex, and superiority complex. So what the author says here is that the pursuit of superiority is a natural pursuit. It's a natural trait. When a kid is born, the kid wants to start walking. When the kid is walking, the kid starts. So the kid wants to run. So it's just an innate nature that we want to feel superior. We want to pursue superiority. And therefore, the feeling of inferiority is also natural. And as far as the author is concerned, he says there is nothing wrong in having that sense of inferiority, because it is only because you have got a sense of inferiority that you propel towards doing better, that you want to become better. Where there is a problem is when you get into an inferiority complex or a superiority complex. And the slight distinction between that is that when you start to cling on to the fact that because X has happened, therefore I can't do Y, that's where the problem is. Because someone thinks that I am not good enough in, let's say, academic, I'm not good enough in doing certain things, therefore I cannot earn this much amount of money, therefore I cannot have wealth, and therefore I cannot have a good life, right? When people start to get into that scenario, that's where it is sort of a inferiority complex issue, and that's not really good. So that was the first point that came through. The second piece was avoiding the game of competition. The problem with competition is, even if you win in life, if you've got a competitive way, then you always have to win, right? So that's the second point that the author comes through. He also talks about how anger is on most instances a power struggle. uh, Third and the fourth point is around life tasks and life lies, and these are two amazing concepts that the book introduced me to. The life tasks are nothing but there are three types. So you've got life task of work, you've got life task of friendship, you've got life task of love, and they are what they appear to be. If you have to go work to eke out a living, that's basically your life task related to work. If you have to go and have a few things to do with your friendship, that's your life task for friendship, and for love is for family, for your spouse, and everything else, right? The author then goes on to defining something called what is my task versus what is your task in a different chapter, and I'll come to that, but that's what he talks about life task. The last point during this night was life lies. And life lies are nothing but wherein you try and draw a pretext, you try and build a rationale for doing something. Because I don't want to do something, I start building a rationale for that. And that's what a life lie is. Example, if I don't want to make this video today because it's Sunday and I just don't want to, I would start building up a rationale saying, oh, you know what, it's already a little late. Oh, I've got a sort of a cricket match going on. I want to watch it. I want to spend some time with my kid. I will just drop some of the rationales and I would, on the basis of that rationale, say that I don't want to do this. So that rationale is what is a life lie. So that's all the discussion that happens on night number 2. Discussion on night number 3 revolves around denying the desire for recognition, and there are 3 important points that I will bring about. Number 1, separation of tasks and discarding others' tasks. Okay, so this was a point which relates to what I talked in night 2 around our life tasks. So we have got some tasks attached to us. However, a lot of time we start doing the tasks which are not really meant to be done by us. It is to be done by someone else. And drawing a distinction there to say that this is my task, this is not my task, is really important. So again, I'll take my example. Making this video and doing everything to say that it gets uploaded in YouTube. That's my task. Now, whether you like it or you dislike it, whether you comment, whether you do not comment, whether you subscribe or not, that is not my task. And I should not really get into managing the task that is not mine and vice versa, right? So that is the separation of tasks that the author talks about. And then the author says about recognition that if you have got this intense desire for others to recognize you, what you would really get into is that you will not have freedom. Because you are looking for recognition from others, you will do things which others would find worth recognizing. And because you're doing things which others are finding worth recognizing for, you're really, really living because how others would want you to live. And therefore, he says that you should deny the desire for recognition. He says, and I love this line, freedom is being disliked by other people. Now he stops short of saying no, you, it doesn't mean that you have to do things so that others dislike you, but in if you take any example, right, and you can take a moment to think about it, majority of the things wherein you just want to do them would very likely result in people disliking you. So if you really want to be happy, if you really want to be free, then you should do those anyway. And if people start disliking you for that, then there are multiple ways to sort of manage that scenario. So we'll talk about night number 4. The night number 4 revolves around the concept where the center of the world is, right? And again, there are 3 points that I liked here. Number 1 was goal of all relations is nothing but a feeling of community. So he says that all these interpersonal relationships that we have got, at the end of it, we have got them because we want to have that sense of community. That was one. Second, it draws the distinction to say that you are not the center of the universe. You know, yes, it is our life, and when it is our life, we think we are at the center of it. But he exhorts, he makes that point a number of times to say you are not the center of the world. And in fact, he gives that view of a map versus a globe. On a map, you can say what is the center. On a globe, you can't say what is the center, right? And that is the way to look at things. Number 3, the author talks about not praising, not rebuking. So he says whether you are telling someone, oh, you have done awesome, or when you're telling someone that you have done, horrible work here, both of them are not required. And what he really says here is that there are 2 types of relationships one can have. A rebuke or a praise work only and only if the type of relationship that we have is a horizontal relationship. There is a level here and there is a level above, and only when you've got level above that person can have a view on you to say that, you know what, awesome job, and then praiseworthy job, versus saying that you haven't done a good job. And the author says as much as possible all our relationships should really be horizontal relations, and it should not be vertical relations. Now there was one line here which I again loved. It was to say that all of us are equal but not same. Night number 5. And this is the last night in terms of how the discussion happens. And there were 7 important points that I could glean out of the discussion that happens on night number 5. The entire night revolves around the concept of living in earnestness and living in the here and now. Number 1, it talks about self acceptance, which is basically to say that you don't have to start judging yourself for why you are not X, why you are not Y. You have to accept yourself the way you are. So that was the point number one, as self-acceptance. The point number two was the point around confidence. And the author gives a good distinction between what is trust versus confidence. Frankly, till the time I had read this book, I use the word in a certain way, but not in this way that has been called out. So the author says trust is when, on the back of a lot of examples, on a back of uh, a lot of anecdotes, you know that the person would perform in a certain way, right? Because the person previously has done A, B, C, you know that the person would be even be able to do this task, which is D. And when you know that, and then you give that person that opportunity to do the work, that is trust. And a lot of us do that. But what the author says is you really need to have confidence. And confidence means it does not matter what the other person has done in past. It does not matter whether or not you've been there to see what the person has done. Confidence means, irrespective of all that, you would go ahead and take that leap of faith with the person. There was a discussion that happened between the youth and the philosopher at this point in time to say, "Oh, what if I've been taken advantage of?" And the philosopher says, yes, there will be scenarios when people will take advantage of. However, unless you have got confidence in people and unless you go with a leap of faith, you'll never ever be able to have deep relations with others. If you only go with trust, it will not lead to deep relations. And because you won't have deep relations, you won't find that sense of happiness. So that was point number two. Point number three was that the essence of all work is that sense of contribution to others. Point number four was workaholism is a life lie, and I think this was very relevant for a lot of us. It basically says that if you keep thinking, oh, you've got so much work to do, and because you've got so much work to do, you can't help people at home, you can't really help your spouse, you can't spend time with your child, then you know what? You are just making it up. You don't really have that much time. You should be able to find time out of that entire work to be able to spend on a lot of other things. And therefore, workaholism, almost like alcoholism, is a life lie. So that was point number four. Point number five was to say that you can be happy now. It doesn't matter what has happened before. If you really want to be happy, you can be happy now. And then the author goes on to define what does it really mean to be happy. So he says, and this is where it was a sort of a penny drop moment, the only thing and the one thing that is required for you to be happy is for you to feel, right, that you are of value to someone. Again, it is not of you being value to someone, it is for you to feel to that you've got some value in someone's life. And that is all there is to happiness. Point number six, the author says that life is a series of moments. So there is, it's not that we are starting with point A and then we are going to point Z and that's what life is. Because if that is life, then the goal is death, which doesn't make sense. And therefore, life is nothing but a series of moments. The unborn past, the dead past, and the unborn tomorrow. It doesn't matter where, how relevant they are because they are not. The only thing that is really important is your current, is your present. And that's what the author is talking about when he says that life is a series of moments. Point number seven, and that's how the book ends, says life in general has no meaning, right? Uh, so, first it says that life should be looked at as a series of moments. You should just enjoy the moment. And then he goes on to say, for you to enjoy life, you should treat life as a dance because when you are dancing there is no goal of it, you are just enjoying the dance, and that is how the life needs to be lived. And finally, when we are doing a number of things and we realize that life doesn't seem to have any meaning, you should be guided by a north star. You should be guided by this principle that as long as what you are doing, you get a sense that you're contributing to others, then you are good, right? So I'll quickly summarize what's been said. There are a number of points that the book is making. However, the message that one should take back home is, a, you got to have self acceptance. You got to have that feeling of saying that this is the way I am. Once you've got self acceptance, you should be able to have confidence in others. As you have got confidence in others, you will treat everyone as comrades. You would therefore have a sense of community. As you have that sense of community, you will feel that you are valued. And when you feel that you are valued, you are happy. And therefore, in this way, you should live your entire life like you are dancing. Like this is the only moment that you have got. And if at any point in time things are not making sense, the North Star needs to be to understand and to remember whether or not you are contributing to others. Well, if you are, then life is good. That's all you need to do. So that's everything with this book. As I did say, I will highly recommend you buy the book. I will highly recommend that you read it. And this is one of those books which is not to be read only once, but it needs to be read and reread and digested. Until the next video, you have a good time.